My name is Claire Bennett, and I'm 32. For most of my life, my family has thrown lavish parties for my brother Ryan, ballrooms, DJs, even custom cakes, while my own birthdays slipped by with forgotten texts and last-minute gift cards. I stayed silent. Year after year, I smiled through the hurt, poured everything into my work, and saved every dollar. Not to prove a point, just to survive it. This year, when they forgot again, I didn't say a word, because they had no idea what I had built or what I was about to reveal. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever felt overlooked by the people closest to you, hit that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss how I finally stepped out of the shadows. I grew up in a picture-perfect colonial house in the quiet suburbs of Portland, Oregon. White shutters, red door, a manicured lawn that my dad prided himself on. From the outside, we looked exactly like the kind of family people imagine when they think of the American dream. My parents, David and Patricia, were both successful. Dad was a corporate attorney with a reputation for being sharp but fair. Mom ran a chain of upscale boutiques downtown. And then there were we two children, Claire and Ryan, and our golden retriever, Max. It was all so perfectly staged. But like most staged things, it wasn't built to reflect the truth, just to hide it. The truth is, some children are born into the center of the room, while others are handed the shadows. Ryan, my older brother, was the sun in our family. Bright, boisterous, endlessly celebrated. I, on the other hand, was quiet, observant, the one who colored in the corners while everyone else posed for the picture. I remember the moment I first understood how this worked. Ryan's 10th birthday was more than a party. It was an event. Our backyard was transformed into something out of a movie. Inflatable castles catered food, a magician who pulled rabbits out of hats and coins from behind ears. Over 50 kids ran wild, laughing and screaming, while my parents beamed proudly and recorded every moment on their new camcorder. 3 months later, when I turned 8, I woke up early with that fluttery kind of excitement only kids understand. I remember choosing my favorite dress and brushing my hair 3 times. But that morning, Mom rushed us through breakfast, hustling Ryan to his soccer tournament. "We'll do something special tonight, honey," she said, kissing my forehead before disappearing out the door. That something special was a store-bought cake after dinner, placed in front of me with 8 skinny candles. Dad handed me a gift bag with a journal and colored pencils. They sang quickly, almost absent-mindedly, before returning to stories about Ryan's game. I tried to smile. I even said thank you. But later that night, I sat on my bed writing in that journal about the party I had imagined and the silence I had received instead. When I asked gently why mine was so different, Mom smiled. "You're the quiet one, sweetheart. Ryan likes the big crowds. We thought you'd prefer something simple," Dad added. "We're just exhausted from work. Planning big parties takes energy." I nodded as if it made sense, as if their tiredness and Ryan's loudness were enough to explain why my excitement didn't count. It wouldn't be the last time my joy was considered expendable. The hallway of our home slowly filled with framed photos of Ryan trophies, team pictures, newspaper clippings. But no piano recital pictures of me. No certificates for my spelling bee wins. No honor roll awards. Just empty walls on my side of the house. My Aunt Linda visited from San Diego one summer and noticed. "Claire," she asked gently, "why aren't there any photos of you in here?" I shrugged. I had already learned the answer: the walls only held what the family wanted to remember, and somehow I didn't make the cut. That was the beginning. Not of resentment, not yet. Just the quiet realization that in my family's story, I was always going to be the footnote. But I wasn't going to stay there forever. By the time I was 9, I'd already learned something most kids don't figure out until much later: being good isn't always enough to be noticed. While Ryan brought home B- report cards and was met with celebratory pizza nights and proud Facebook posts, my straight A's were met with distracted nods. "That's nice, honey," Mom would say, barely looking up from her magazine. Dad would glance at the grades, grunt something vaguely approving, and go right back to scanning legal briefs at the kitchen table. There was no malice in their tone, no cruelty in their words. That's what made it harder to understand. It wasn't what they said it was, everything they didn't. When I won the district spelling bee in 5th grade, I stood on stage clutching my trophy, scanning the audience. The auditorium was packed with parents all clapping and cheering, but not mine. Dad had a deposition that morning. Mom was overseeing a store renovation. So it was just me. Me and my teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who gave me an extra long hug afterward and whispered, "I'm proud of you." I smiled back, but something inside me cracked. That was the year my school counselor started referring to me as highly independent. But that wasn't really true. I didn't want to be independent. I had to be. I packed my own lunches. I got myself to school. I handled things most kids didn't even think about, because somewhere deep down, I understood no one else would. And still, I tried. I didn't know then how exhausting it is to try so hard to matter to people who've already decided where their attention belongs. But there was one person who never needed reminding: Grandma Helen. She lived just 20 minutes away in a modest apartment filled with old books and the smell of lemon tea. Every birthday she showed up without fail, no matter how busy, no matter how tired. She always had a carefully chosen gift, a handwritten card, and a hug that lasted a few seconds longer than necessary, just long enough to convince me that I wasn't invisible to everyone. "You have a quiet kind of light, Claire," she told me once. "Your brother, he's the fireworks. But you, sweetheart, you're the stars. Steady, constant. The kind of light that helps people find their way home." I didn't understand how badly I needed to hear that until she said it. Every time I left her apartment, I walked out feeling a little more whole. Then came the questions from Aunt Linda. She visited once or twice a year from California, warm, stylish, sharp-eyed. She noticed things, noticed me. One afternoon, while passing through our hallway, lined with Ryan's trophies, she paused. "Claire, why aren't there any pictures from your piano recital on the wall?" she asked. I froze. She pointed at a photo of Ryan mid-air during a soccer game, then another of him at his science fair where he'd placed third. "I don't know," I said quietly. But I did know. It just didn't matter. Linda frowned. "That doesn't seem right." She meant well, but she lived too far away, and my parents had answers ready for everything. "Claire's just more private," Mom would say. "She doesn't like the spotlight." "Ryan needs encouragement," Dad would add. "She's already so driven, we don't want to add pressure." And like that, they made my achievements sound like problems, as if success came easily to me so it didn't deserve celebration. But Grandma Helen saw through all of it. She showed up to every award ceremony, even when her arthritis made walking painful. When she couldn't drive, she took cabs or convinced neighbors to bring her. One time she told me, "Some people can only recognize what looks like them. Your parents understand, Ryan, but that doesn't mean you're less." Her words became a kind of shield. They didn't stop the sting of being overlooked, but they reminded me that being unseen by some doesn't mean you're unworthy. And so I wrote pages and pages in the same journal I'd received on my 8th birthday. I wrote about things I couldn't say out loud, how I wished they'd look at me during dinner, how I memorized jokes just to get Dad to laugh, how my heart fluttered when Grandma Helen clapped the loudest in a quiet room. What the walls in our house refused to hold my stories, my hopes, my grief, I began holding for myself, not to prove them wrong, just to stay whole. By the time I turned 11, I had mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. It wasn't that I wanted to be invisible, it's that the alternative, asking for space in a room already too full of someone else's noise, felt harder, louder, riskier. So I made myself small, quiet, efficient. I earned praise from teachers for being organized, polite, independent, words that sound like compliments, until you realize they're just another way of saying, This child doesn't need anyone. I needed someone, but not in ways my family could see. Ryan, on the other hand, needed everything and got it. Tutors when his grades slipped, new cleats every season, applause for every goal, even when the team lost. His needs were loud and obvious, the kind of parents rush to meet because they come with fanfare. Mine were silent, and so they went unmet. It was during that time I met Emma Caldwell. We sat next to each other in science class, and she laughed at one of my shy jokes about protons and bonding. By the end of the week, we were trading lunches and finishing each other's lab notes. Her home was unlike anything I'd known. The first time I walked into her kitchen, her dad looked up from chopping vegetables and said, "So you're Claire. We've heard so much about you." Her mom offered me a second helping of lasagna before I even finished the first. And when Emma got an A- on a math test, the entire family celebrated like she'd won the Nobel Prize. I wasn't sure what shocked me more, how happy they were for something so small, or how freely they gave that happiness away. At first, I didn't know what to do with it. When Mrs. Caldwell hugged me after I won second place in the school science fair, I nearly cried. Not because the win mattered, but because she looked me in the eye and said, "I'm proud of you, sweetheart." Those words, so ordinary in their house, felt like water to someone who'd been quietly thirsty for years. Emma noticed things too. She came over for a sleepover once a few days after my birthday. I hadn't told her it had passed, but she saw the lone greeting card on my desk, the one Mom and Dad had scribbled their names on just before rushing Ryan to another basketball tournament. "No cake?" she asked. "No time," I shrugged. She tilted her head. "Claire, that's not normal, you know that, right?" Her words landed like a door creaking open. Because up until that moment, I'd convinced myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was too sensitive, that maybe my expectations were unfair. But Emma saw it. And once someone else saw it too, it stopped being just a feeling. It became fact. That's when I began writing in a new way. Not just about birthdays and school events, but about patterns, about silences, about how it felt to stand in the middle of your own house and feel like a guest. I wrote in metaphors, in small poems, in long letters I never sent. I wrote because speaking never seemed to work. One afternoon I tried telling Mom that I wished she'd been at the spelling bee. She sighed, flipping through a catalog, and said, "Sweetheart, you're just so self-sufficient. We honestly thought it didn't matter to you. It mattered. But if I had to explain it, then maybe I wasn't worth the effort." That's how it started to feel. So I built my identity around being unbothered, around being the easy one, the child who didn't make demands, who didn't cause stress, who handled things. And every time I succeeded without their help, they took it as proof I didn't need them. But needing and asking are not the same thing. I didn't ask because when I had the answers hurt more than the silence. So I kept showing up, quietly, invisibly, until invisibility became part of who I thought I was. What I didn't know then was how deep those patterns would run, or how long it would take to unravel them. By the time I turned 16, I had long stopped expecting anything grand. I had learned over and over that in our house, celebrations were loud for Ryan and quiet for me. His victories echoed through our living room with music gifts and family group chats buzzing. Mine passed gently, quietly, like a breeze slipping under a closed door. Still, I held out hope. There's something about turning 16. No matter how practical or guarded you are, you can't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, this one might be different. That 16 means something. That it might finally be the year they see you. It fell on a Saturday, a clear spring morning, the kind that smells like freshly cut grass and new beginnings. I woke up early, took extra care with my hair, put on a soft blue dress I'd picked out months ago, just in case. I came downstairs feeling nervous but open, like maybe I'd get a smile. Maybe there'd be a surprise, a gesture, a note. Instead, I found Mom and Dad packing the back of the car. Coolers, folding chairs, blankets, Ryan's soccer gear. "Morning, Claire," Mom said, brushing past me. "We need to leave in 20 minutes. Ryan's got to be there early to warm up." Dad looked up just long enough to say, "There's cereal in the pantry, no happy birthday, no balloon, no hug, not even a mention." I stood there for a moment, unsure whether to speak or swallow it. I swallowed. I always did. We drove to the tournament in silence, the air inside the car filled with game strategies and weather updates. Not once did anyone ask how I felt that day. Not once did anyone look over and say, "We see you." We spent my birthday on cold bleachers. I clapped when Ryan scored. I smiled in team photos. I sat through a post-game pizza dinner meant for his teammates, pushing a slice around my plate while laughter filled the booth. 16 candles burned down in my imagination that night. I never said a word. What made it worse? What made it sting in a way I couldn't ignore was remembering Ryan's 16th birthday just 6 months earlier. My parents had rented a hotel ballroom. There was a DJ, a photo booth, custom decorations in his school colors. Toward the end of the night, Dad had given a toast, then handed Ryan a tiny box. Inside were keys to a brand new Jeep Wrangler, custom rims, leather interior, a sound system that made the neighbors hate us for weeks. The applause had been thunderous, and here I was, barely acknowledged, eating pizza with strangers, no card, no keys, not even a text from my parents after we got home. That night, I sat at my desk and stared at the journal I had once loved. But instead of writing, I simply closed it. There was nothing left to process, nothing left to explain. The silence had already said it all. Emma texted me later that evening. "Happy birthday, Claire. Want to come over tomorrow? Mom made lemon bars." I stared at the screen for a long time. The offer wasn't extravagant. It wasn't planned by a committee. It wasn't wrapped in a bow. But it was real. I typed back, "Yes, please." The next day, I sat at her kitchen table as her family sang to me. Her younger brother lit a single candle stuck in the middle of a lemon bar. They all clapped when I blew it out. It was the smallest celebration I've ever had. And somehow the most meaningful. Because someone remembered. Someone cared. It didn't fix the years of being overlooked. It didn't undo the ache. But it reminded me just enough that I was still here. That I still mattered. Even if the people who raised me couldn't see it. After that birthday, something inside me hardened. Not in a loud, dramatic way. There was no explosion, no big fight, just a quiet shift. A closing of the door I used to keep cracked open for hope, for acknowledgement, for even the smallest sign that maybe I was wrong about how little I mattered. But I wasn't wrong. So I did what I'd always done. I worked, harder than ever. In every class, every club, every assignment, I poured myself into excellence. If I couldn't be celebrated for who I was, maybe I could be noticed for what I achieved. I made it my mission to leave no room for doubt. Ryan coasted through high school with C+ grades, which my parents framed as understandable because of his athletic commitments. "He's got so much on his plate," Mom would say. "He's juggling pressure most kids couldn't handle." Meanwhile, I held a perfect 4.0 GPA. I led 3 academic clubs. I won regional writing competitions and qualified for national debate. I tutored classmates after school. And still nothing. There were no family dinners in my honor, no framed certificates on the wall, no celebratory posts. Just passing acknowledgments said mid-yawn while my mother scrolled through her phone. "That's nice, Claire. That's nice." 3 words that can build a wall around a child faster than silence ever could. I started picking up part-time jobs at 15, first shelving books at the local library. Later, I worked weekends at a coffee shop near campus. I didn't tell my parents why I worked. I let them assume it was for experience or pocket money. But the truth was simple. I needed an exit plan. Every paycheck went into a savings account my grandmother helped me open. Grandma Helen remained my quiet champion, even as her health began to fade. Her arthritis worsened. Walking grew difficult. But she still showed up. When I qualified for the state debate finals, she sat in the front row. Her hands curled in pain, but her eyes locked on mine. "You were brilliant, sweetheart," she whispered afterward. "I hope you never forget what I see in you." Sometimes I wonder if she knew. If she sensed that she was the only one who ever said it out loud. She was the reason I applied to schools out of state. The reason I chose the University of Washington when the acceptance letter came with a full merit scholarship and a handwritten note from the admissions director praising my application essay. I didn't run to tell my parents. I ran to her. We sat in her apartment that evening drinking tea by the window. She held the letter in her hands, eyes misty with pride. "You're going to fly, Claire," she said softly. "They won't even see it coming." That was the first time I felt the full weight of what she'd been carrying all these years. She had watched. She had known. She hadn't imagined the imbalance. She had lived it beside me. When I finally told my parents it was over dinner, I handed them the acceptance letter, waited for a reaction. A smile. A spark of something. Dad looked it over briefly. "That's in Seattle, right?" "That's pretty far." Mom skimmed the top of the page. "A scholarship helps. College is expensive these days." That was all. 10 minutes later, they were talking about Ryan's partial athletic scholarship to State University, debating which hotel they should book for their campus tour, wondering if they should buy him new luggage for the trip. My letter stayed on the table for the rest of the meal, unopened, untouched, like a napkin someone had forgotten to throw away. It eventually disappeared. I found it weeks later, folded and stuffed in a drawer with coupons and expired receipts. By then, I'd stopped expecting anything different. But Grandma Helen hadn't. She framed the letter and placed it next to a photo of me at age 6, gap-toothed, beaming, holding a plastic trophy from my first piano recital. "This is your wall," she said. And in her apartment it really was. A space where I existed fully, loudly, worthily, even if the rest of the world refused to see it. College was a turning point. Not because everything got better, but because I finally got space. Space to breathe. Space to exist outside of someone else's shadow. Space to hear my own thoughts without them being drowned out by cheers for Ryan. The University of Washington was 8 hours away by car, which felt like a continent to me. I moved into a modest dorm room with beige walls and twin beds and instantly felt more at home than I ever had in that perfectly manicured house back in Portland. My roommate Priya Shah was curious, smart, direct in a way I wasn't used to. She noticed things, like how I never called home unless I had to, like how I brushed off good news as if it were nothing. One afternoon I came back from class to find a note card on my desk. "Congrats, Claire Dean's List. That's a big deal. Let's celebrate tonight." It caught me off guard, not because of the gesture itself, but because someone had noticed, without being told, without obligation. When I called home to share the news, I was met with predictability. "That's great, honey," Mom said. "Did you hear Ryan got into that fraternity he wanted?" "They're planning a ski trip for winter break." Dad chimed in to ask if I'd looked at internship opportunities. Then he asked if Ryan could crash with me in Seattle during spring break since the hotels were expensive. Not once did either of them say, "We're proud of you." When I hung up, Priya was watching from her bed, expression unreadable. "That was your family?" she asked gently. I nodded. She hesitated. Then with startling clarity she said, "Claire, that's not normal. You know that, right?" I laughed. Because what else could I do? But her words landed hard, like Emma's had years ago. Only now I was older, wiser, tired. Priya wasn't angry on my behalf. She was confused. Because to her, her parents didn't ignore wins. They celebrated them. To her, love meant attention, visibility, presence. She wasn't trying to hurt me, she was trying to understand. I didn't have the language to explain it yet. I only knew how it felt. Like walking through life with your arms full of gold and being asked why you're not clapping. In college, I started building a world where I could be central, not peripheral. Professors who valued my voice, classmates who respected my work, friends who asked how I was doing and waited for the answer. For the first time, I wasn't performing. I was participating. And still, every time I achieved something big, top of my cohort, invited to present at a national conference, I would instinctively reach for my phone, then pause. Because I already knew how the conversation would go. My family never asked about my research, my classes, my dreams, but they sent texts about Ryan's gym plans, his roommate's drama, the new weightlifting program he was testing. It was like they had drawn a line down the middle of our family. Ryan is on one side, me on the other. And they couldn't see across it even if they tried. But one person always had. Grandma Helen. She called every Sunday, asked for details, took notes during our conversations. One day she mailed me a care package with hand-sewn bookmarks, a tiny framed photo of us, and a letter. "The world is brighter because you're in it," she wrote. "Don't let anyone make you doubt that." That letter stayed taped above my desk for all 4 years. I carried it with me mentally, emotionally, through every lecture, every lonely night, every moment I questioned if I was doing enough. Because somewhere deep down, I still believed that maybe someday, my parents would walk into the life I was building and finally say, "We see you." They never did. Not at graduation. Not when I walked across the stage with honors. Not when my name echoed through the auditorium and the crowd stood to clap. They were there, but they were late. They missed the ceremony, missed the speech, missed the moment. They took a few photos afterward in the parking lot, smiled stiffly, then reminded me they had to leave early to prepare for Ryan's graduation the following weekend. No flowers, no gift, just a check for $100 on a generic card. "Use it for something nice," Mom said. And just like that, the day became theirs again, not mine. But I didn't cry. Not anymore. Instead, I went back to my tiny apartment, opened a cheap bottle of champagne with Priya, and toasted to something far more important than their attention. My own becoming. Because even if they never stepped foot inside the room I'd built, it didn't mean it wasn't real. It didn't mean I wasn't. After college, I did what I had always done, moved forward quietly. While Ryan took a gap year to figure things out, I accepted an entry-level position at Brightcore, a fast-growing tech company back in Portland. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't flashy, but it was mine, my work, my path, my beginning. I showed up early, stayed late, listened more than I spoke. My managers noticed. Within 18 months, I moved from junior analyst to marketing specialist. Another year later, I was leading my own team. The youngest in company history to do so. No fanfare, no cake in the break room, but something deeper. A sense of belonging, of being seen not because I demanded it, but because my work whispered loudly enough. At 25, I was promoted again, this time to brand strategy lead. I celebrated alone with takeout and soft jazz playing in the background. I didn't call home, I didn't text, because I already knew how that conversation would go. "That's great," Claire Mom would say before adding, "Did you hear Ryan just signed a lease for his new gym space?" Dad would chime in about the business loan they were co-signing, about the premium location, the state-of-the-art equipment they helped purchase. They didn't ask how I paid for grad school, or how I survived on scholarships and 2 part-time jobs. They never offered to help. They never needed to, because I never gave them the chance to say no. But I still remembered. Especially when I overheard Ryan bragging to a cousin at Thanksgiving, "Mom and Dad wired me 40 grand last month to lock in the space. They're all in." I stood quietly in the kitchen, pouring cider, pretending not to hear. Later that night, I drove back to my apartment, a high-rise overlooking the river, paid in full by me, every square foot earned, every bill accounted for. I walked into the living room, took off my heels, and sat in silence. Not angry, not jealous, just tired. Tired of pretending the math made sense. Tired of pretending that equal love had been equally shown. My birthdays in my 20s followed the same pattern. A text from Dad, a gift card from Mom, maybe a delayed voicemail if they remembered late. Meanwhile, Ryan's birthday grew into something bigger every year. Dinners, gatherings, trips. His 30th birthday was the pinnacle. A week-long celebration in Hawaii, a beachfront villa, professional photographers. Custom cocktails are named after him. Mom called me weekly with updates. Told me about the itinerary, the luau, the seafood tasting, as if I were part of it. "You'll be coming, right?" she asked one afternoon. I paused, then replied, "I don't think I can get the time off." But the truth was simpler. I couldn't do it. I couldn't stand in the crowd and clap again. I couldn't laugh on cue while pretending that my own 30th birthday 3 months earlier hadn't passed with nothing more than a two-line text from Dad. "Happy birthday, kiddo. Have a good one." That was it. No cake, no call, no family post. Just another day. That summer I started therapy. Not because of a breakdown, but because I finally admitted to myself that functioning wasn't the same as healing. Dr. Renee Collins was gentle but sharp. She didn't let me hide behind politeness. "You've built an impressive life," she said in one session. But I wonder how much of it was built to prove a point. I stared at the floor for a long time. Because she was right. My degrees, my job, my savings account, my spotless apartment. They were all shields. Beautiful, functional, admirable shields. But shields nonetheless. I had spent my whole life trying to be undeniable so that no one could pretend I wasn't worth seeing. But that's the thing about recognition. It loses its power when you have to beg for it. The healing didn't happen overnight. It came slowly. Through conversations I used to avoid. Through boundaries I never knew I was allowed to set. Through the quiet miracle of choosing myself not out of rebellion, but out of self-respect. And somewhere along the way, I began to believe it. That I didn't have to prove my worth. That I already had it. Even if they never applauded. Even if they never noticed. I was still here. Still rising. Still enough. The bonus came in late March. $70,000. Tucked quietly into my direct deposit with a confidential memo from Brightcore's executive office. It was a recognition of the product rebranding campaign I had led for 6 grueling months, a project that pushed me beyond exhaustion, but also reminded me of everything I was capable of. I didn't cry when I read the email. Not at first. I just sat at my kitchen table staring at the screen, frozen. Then I opened a window, let the breeze in, let the moment land. And I wept. Not for the money, not for the title, but for the quiet truth someone finally saw me. Not as a supporting role, not as a default success, but as the architect of something bold, something real. I didn't call my parents. I already knew how that conversation would go. And yet, just to be sure, I did it anyway, out of old habit. "That's nice," Claire, Mom said. "Did Ryan tell you about his new equipment shipment? The gym's really coming together. We're helping him with the lease extension." I nodded into the phone, even though she couldn't see me, even though I wasn't really agreeing. Dad chimed in. "The new location is right by that university. He's gonna do great. Perfect client base. 20 minutes. Not one follow-up question about my role, or the campaign, or what $70,000 meant to someone who had built herself from silence." I hung up gently, closed the door on that moment, but not on myself, because this time, I had a plan. A few weeks later, my manager Amanda Blake invited me to her cottage in coastal Oregon. "Come breathe," she said. "We both need ocean air." On the drive there, she pointed to a quiet Cape Cod-style house with weathered shingles and a for sale sign swaying in the breeze. "It's been sitting for months," she said. "Owners moved overseas. They're motivated to sell." We stopped. Just for fun, I told myself. But as we walked the grounds, something shifted. There was a narrow path to a private cove, hardwood floors beneath dusty drop cloths, a fireplace with a cracked stone mantel that needed love not replacing. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the windows at sunset. The way the wind moved through the pines was like a hush waiting to be heard. By morning I made the call, submitted an offer 10% below asking. By the end of the week it was mine. No one in my family knew. Not when Dad called to ask about tax strategies. Not when Mom sent me updates on Ryan's gym renovations. Not when Ryan texted complaining about permit delays and how it's exhausting being the one carrying the weight of a business. I said nothing. Because this house, this battered, beautiful, quiet place, wasn't just a purchase. It was a boundary, a beginning, a choice. Every weekend I drove out to the coast. Alone. No audience. No applause. Just music, paint, and purpose. I ripped out old linoleum, sanded cabinets, replaced light fixtures. Choose wall colors based on feeling, not function. Soft creams, stormy blues, warm grays that reminded me of the sky after rain. I installed shelves and filled them with books I hadn't had time to read in years. Bought a record player, cooked barefoot, slept with the windows open. I was building more than a home. I was building peace. Every nail, every brushstroke, every decision made without seeking approval felt like a quiet revolution. I didn't need them to be proud, because for the first time, I was proud of myself. Not just for surviving, but for creating something no one could take credit for. No one could explain away. No one could dim. The house was mine. The healing was mine. And I wasn't going to hide it forever. I just needed to decide when and how I'd let the world know. The house was finished 2 days before Ryan's yacht party. His 34th birthday, planned for weeks, maybe months, was to be the most extravagant yet. A private charter on the Willamette River, gourmet catering, a guest list of 40, including family, friends, business partners, and acquaintances I hadn't heard from in years. The digital invitation arrived in my inbox, polished and professional. Custom fonts, branded color palette, a timeline detailing when to arrive for the surprise, when to toast, and where to park. The registry link, yes, there was a registry for gym equipment donations, was thoughtfully placed at the bottom. I stared at the invite for a full minute, then replied simply, "Happy to bring wine." No one asked if I had plans for my birthday, which had passed 3 days earlier. No dinner, no message, not even a generic Facebook post from my parents, not even a forwarded meme from Ryan. Just silence. And I had let it pass without comment, without expectation. Not because it didn't matter, but because I refused to chase acknowledgement anymore. But this time something felt different. Maybe it was the completeness of the house. Maybe it was how much of myself I'd poured into it. Maybe it was the fact that healing after a while doesn't want to hide. It wants air, sunlight, space to exist. So on the morning of Ryan's party, I drove to the coast. The house greeted me like it always did, quiet, steady, waiting. I opened the windows, let the ocean breeze roll in, and began photographing everything. The finished kitchen, the freshly painted walls, the sunlight floods the master bedroom, the back deck that overlooked the crashing Pacific like it had been made for me and me alone. I took my time, adjusted angles, opened curtains, let the light tell the story. Then I wrote a caption. excited to finally share my secret project from the past few months. I bought a vacation home on the Oregon coast and have been renovating it on weekends. Grateful for the career that made this possible, and looking forward to sunrise coffee on this deck for years to come. I scheduled the post for 7:15 p.m., right when Ryan would step aboard his yacht. I didn't post out of spite. I posted out of truth. Because the narrative didn't have to belong to them anymore. I didn't have to shrink so Ryan could shine. We could both exist, but only if I stopped making myself invisible. I arrived at the marina at 6:30 sharp, dressed in navy silk, neutral lipstick, a pair of heels I'd bought months ago but never worn. The boat was dazzling. String lights, floral centerpieces, waitstaff in crisp black uniforms. My parents flitted between guests, whispering instructions to caterers and checking their watches every few minutes. Claire Mom said surprised, "You look nice. The wine can go at the bar station." Ryan arrived on cue 5 minutes late. Everyone screamed surprise as he climbed aboard grinning like a movie star. My parents rushed to hug him. Champagne corks popped. Music played. Dad raised a glass and toasted his son's character, ambition, and vision. At 7:15 my phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. Likes. Comments. Messages. Tags. I stepped aside and opened the app. My post had exploded. Friends from college, colleagues from Bright Core, old neighbors, even casual acquaintances were writing, "This is stunning. You deserve all of this and more. When can I visit? That view is unreal." Then came the questions, the DMs, the phone calls. Mom's number flashed on my screen. I let it go to voicemail. She called again, then again. I kept my phone on silent. My cousin Hannah walked over, phone in hand. "Claire, is this real?" she asked, eyes wide. "You bought a house." Her voice carried. Others turned. A small group formed. Photos were passed around. Conversations shifted. Heads turned. My name rippled across the deck like a dropped glass. I kept smiling. I kept sipping my wine. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't explain. But for the first time in my life, they asked. And I answered calmly, briefly, without apology. It wasn't about taking the spotlight. It was about finally standing in it, on my own terms. By 7:30, the yacht had shifted. Not its course, but its mood. Conversations that had once circled Ryan's gym now floated toward my post. My name, spoken softly, curiously, was no longer just the afterthought at family gatherings. It was the topic. And that made everyone uncomfortable. My phone kept buzzing in my clutch. I checked once, 12 missed calls, all from Mom. Then a 13th, this time from Dad. I silenced the screen and tucked it away. Mom approached first. Her expression was tight, somewhere between a smile and a storm. "Claire," she said just loud enough to keep things civil. "We need to talk. Privately." I turned to face her. Calm, composed. "We can talk later. Right now, I'm enjoying the party." She blinked. The refusal caught her off guard. I'd never told her no, not like that. Dad wasn't far behind. His voice clipped and low. "You blindsided us. Posting about the house during Ryan's celebration. What were you thinking?" I took a breath. A long, measured breath. I was thinking that I'm proud of what I've built, and I wanted to share it. But tonight, Mom pressed. "You've taken all the attention. It was supposed to be about Ryan." I looked her in the eye, steady and still. "There are 364 other days you could have celebrated my birthday." Her mouth opened, then closed. For a split second, just a flicker, her face softened, but it vanished just as quickly. "Is that what this is about?" she asked, voice rising. "Revenge." Because we forgot. No, I said. This is about me, sharing my life, on my terms. A pause settled between us, sharp, uncomfortable. But I didn't fill it. Because for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for their discomfort. Minutes later, Ryan appeared beside me, confused, irritated. What's going on? Mom and Dad are freaking out about some house. I turned to him, choosing every word carefully. I bought a vacation home on the Oregon coast. I've been renovating it. I posted about it tonight. He frowned. During my party, his voice held the familiar edge, the one I knew too well, the same tone he used when a teacher praised me in front of him, or when Grandma Helen cheered louder for my spelling bee win than for his soccer trophy. I finished the renovations yesterday, I said simply. It felt like the right moment. He stared at me, waiting for me to shrink, waiting for the apology. But it didn't come. Instead, I smiled softly. Your party looks beautiful. The seafood table is incredible. He blinked, caught between insult and confusion. He didn't know what to do with my calm, my clarity, my refusal to be smaller. I walked away before he could respond. As I moved back toward the deck rail, I heard whispers behind me. Cousins are passing phones around. Aunts are asking questions. Not all of it was flattering. Not all of it was kind. But none of it shook me. Because the ocean was still there. Steady. Silent. Just beyond the edge of the boat. And somewhere just down the coast was a house I had made into a home. My home. I wasn't chasing attention. I wasn't hijacking anything. I was simply tired of pretending that silence meant peace. Later that night, as the party wound down and guests began to disembark, I gathered my things. I had made my appearance, brought my wine, offered my congratulations. I had given the version of myself they expected, until I didn't. As I reached the gangway, Ryan caught up to me. You always do this, he muttered. You make everything about you. I stopped. Turned. Ryan, I said softly. In 32 years, I've never had a party like this. Never had my name in a family toast. Never had a single moment that was just mine. His jaw tightened. I bought a house. With my money. With my effort. And I'm proud of that. Your celebration is beautiful. I've been respectful all evening. Both things can exist. You being celebrated. Me being seen. He had no answer. Just silence. And for once, it didn't belong to me. I walked to my car with the wind behind me, and not a single apology left in my throat. The morning after Ryan's party, I let my phone ring. First it was Mom, then Dad, then Ryan. Calls, voicemails, a flurry of texts, each more urgent than the last. We need to talk. You owe us an explanation. That post was inappropriate. You blindsided your family. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel rushed to respond. Instead, I brewed my coffee, opened the curtains in my Portland apartment, sat on the balcony and watched the light shift across the city skyline. Peacefully. I thought about the words I'd rehearsed in therapy, about boundaries, about worth, about the difference between being available and being accessible. By noon, I called Mom back. Her tone was clipped frustration barely masked. Claire, what you did was selfish. You completely overshadowed your brother's celebration. Everyone was talking about your house, not him. I kept my voice even. I shared a personal milestone. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't interrupt the toast. I simply let people see what I've built. You could have shared it any other day. Yes, I replied calmly. Just like any of you could have acknowledged my birthday 3 days before. But no one did. Again. There was a pause. That uncomfortable kind that stretches between old patterns and new truths. Is this really about a birthday? She asked, voice tight. No, I said gently. It's about a lifetime. A pattern. A silence that became normal. She didn't argue, not right away. Instead, she sighed. You've always been independent. You never needed the same kind of attention Ryan did. I felt my chest tighten, then loosen. I was independent, I said, because I had to be, not because I didn't want to be seen. The line went quiet. Then Dad called. His approach was more direct. Claire, your mother's upset. This whole thing. It's unnecessary. We've always supported you both equally. I almost laughed. Not out of cruelty, but out of disbelief. Dad, I said, can you name the last thing I achieved that you celebrated my promotion? My grad school acceptance? My first industry award? He hesitated. The silence was answer enough. We've always been proud of you, he said at last. We just thought you didn't need the reinforcement. Pride without expression, I replied, feels a lot like indifference. He sighed. Look, Ryan's hurt. You really blindsided him. He's hurt, I said, because for the first time he had to share the spotlight. Not because I took it, but because I finally stepped into it. Later that day, Ryan texted, Congrats on the house. I shouldn't have snapped at you. The place looks great. It wasn't an essay, it wasn't a grand apology, but it was something. I thanked him, invited him to visit someday if he wanted. No pressure, no performance. Aunt Linda called next. Her voice was warm, thrilled. I saw the photos. Claire, it's stunning. I'm booking a flight. August if that works. I need to see this in person. Her words melted something in me. Then came a message from my cousin Hannah. You always had an eye for beauty. Even as a kid, I remember how you used to rearrange your bedroom just to make it feel right. I hadn't known anyone remembered. For nearly a week, my parents didn't call again, and I didn't reach out. I focused on work, in therapy, on selecting chairs for the deck, on planting lavender along the walkway. Each task grounded me in a truth I had waited years to claim. I no longer needed to be invited into their story, because I had written my own. A week after the party, Dad called. I'd like to visit, he said. Just me. 1 hour. I think we should talk. I agreed. That Friday, he stepped into my apartment looking smaller than I remembered. Less sure, less scripted. He sat on the couch, declined coffee, then said, almost too quietly, I've been thinking about what you said. I waited. We didn't mean to ignore you, Claire, but intent doesn't undo impact. I'm sorry. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that mattered more. Before he left, he looked at me and asked, Can I see the house sometime? I nodded. Because healing sometimes begins with being asked, with being seen, with being let in not because you demand it, but because you finally stopped waiting for permission and built the door yourself. They came, not all at once, and not without hesitation, but they came. A few weeks after Dad's visit, I sent the message. I'm hosting a small housewarming next month. I'd love for you all to come if you're open to it. I wasn't sure who would say yes. Dad replied immediately. We'll be there. Thank you for inviting us. Ryan followed simple and neutral. I'll make it. Curious to see it in person. Mom took longer. When she finally responded, it was cautious. We'll plan to come. Let me know what to bring. I told her just to bring herself, because the truth was, I didn't need anything else. The morning of their visit, the sky over the Oregon coast was wide and clear. A soft breeze moved through the pine trees. The sun cast a glow on the porch steps I had sanded. Inside the house was ready. Not perfect, but honest. The way I'd always wanted to feel. I set out fresh towels, arranged wildflowers in glass jars, put on soft music and brewed coffee. When their car pulled into the gravel driveway, I felt something I hadn't felt with them in years. Steady. I opened the door, met them on the porch. Mom looked around, eyes scanning the siding, the path, the tall windows. The drive was longer than I expected, she said. There's a more direct route, I replied gently. I'll show you before you leave. Welcome to my home. I gave the tour slowly. No rush, no effort to impress. Just the truth. Dad asked questions about the renovation process. Ryan complimented the sound system. Mom stayed quiet until we reached the kitchen. She touched the quartz countertop, fingers grazing the surface. "This must have cost a fortune," she said. "It was a significant investment," I replied, "but one that aligns with my goals and brings me joy." On the back deck, something shifted. Even Mom couldn't pretend the view wasn't breathtaking. We walked to the private cove, collected shells, talked about small things, weather recipes, home repairs. And then after dinner, just as the sun turned the sky to gold, Dad cleared his throat. "Claire," he said, holding a small gift bag, "we missed your birthday. And we've missed other things too. We want to do better." Inside the bag was a silver picture frame. It held a photo I had never seen. Me, maybe 7 years old, sitting in Grandma Helen's lap. Both of us laughing, caught mid-motion. Mom spoke, then her voice quiet. "She gave us this years ago. Said it captured your spirit. We found it going through her things. Thought, maybe it belonged here." I nodded. Words caught in my throat. Later, Ryan joined me on the deck. We didn't talk much. He just stared out at the ocean and said, "I never realized. I thought you liked being on your own." "Some of it I did," I admitted, "but not all of it. A lot of it was survival." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry I never asked. It wasn't everything, but it was something." And sometimes that's where healing begins, not in perfection, but in willingness. That night, as I turned off the lights and stepped out onto the porch, I looked up at the stars. Steady, silent, exactly the kind of light Grandma Helen always said I was. And for the first time, I didn't need anyone else to see it, to believe it was real. For years, I believed that if I stayed quiet, worked hard, and asked for nothing eventually, they'd see me. That love would show up if I just earned it enough. But what I've learned is this: your worth isn't something that has to be proven to anyone who refuses to recognize it. It's something you claim, quietly, steadily, on your own terms. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop waiting to be invited into the light and simply turn it on for yourself. If any part of this story spoke to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Whether you've lived something similar or are still finding your voice, your story matters too. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, ones about quiet resilience, self-worth, and choosing yourself, hit that subscribe button. Because healing isn't loud, but it is real, and you deserve to be seen.